Hey guys, we just came back from a seminar where we learned about how people are able to defer paying taxes on their real estate investment properties. And we are full of ideas. We have some notes here, so we
Yeah.
just want to kind of talk through it and maybe you can pick up some nuggets along the way.
Yeah.
So let's talk about what is 1031 exchange? What is
Yeah.
that?
Yeah, absolutely. So the seminar that we were just at was a lady that came in to talk to us about a 1031 exchange. So that's actually code in our tax code for allowing tax deferment on your gains when you sell a property.
Yes, and the obviously there's a do's and don'ts, and what's important is that we kind of at least recognize how it generally works, right? So basically, if you buy a property for $100,000 and then you're gonna sell it for $200,000, you have $100,000 gain, and you want to avoid paying taxes on that. And there's quite a bit of different taxes. You have to pay capital gains tax, you have to pay healthcare tax, you have to pay depreciation recapture tax, and maybe even state tax if you're outside of Florida.
Yeah.
So you want to defer that by buying another similar property.
Exactly.
And you can keep on doing that multiple times until you finally cash out later on down in life and use that for your retirement.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, which at that point maybe you're in a much different tax bracket. So for those of you who maybe are fortunate enough to be in a nice high tax bracket right now, your capital gains tax is going to be pretty hefty. So especially if you have quite a bit of a gain on any individual property. So this is a system that's been around for forever. Actually, people may not know this. It's not something new, but back in 2005, tons of people were using 1031 exchanges. That kind of dipped off, obviously, as the real estate market took a turn in 2007, 2008. It's rebounded quite a bit since 2013, and we're back up to those numbers. Kind of 2015 was pretty high, and people are using them now.
Yeah. In fact, there's more money in the 1031 exchange kind of escrow accounts than there were in 2005 at the height of the real estate market. So, I mean, things are really moving along well.
Yeah, and that's because, as you may know, people have seen quite a bit of an uptick in the equity that they hold in their properties, because anytime the market goes up, your equity goes up most likely. So, lots of investors are thinking about this as a way to defer the taxes that they would otherwise have to pay. And some reasons for why you might want to do that is that 20% you may be paying in the tax is cash that you could otherwise have to go out and buy another property. So there's cash flow reasons for doing it. There's, if you've already depreciated an asset to the most that you can, then you kind of are out of options on that particular property. So you might want to pick up a new one that's a higher value and be able to depreciate the difference in the two. So it also allows for other kind of strategic tax maneuvers as well.
I'll give you an awesome example that we heard at the seminar. So you have a couple that's living in New York, and they decide to purchase a rental in Florida, and they rent that out for a couple of years. Then they go ahead and sell their property in New York, their main residence, and then they move to Florida and convert that investment property into their main residence. And in the process of doing that, they avoid paying a lot of taxes. Very interesting. Now, all of the details and the hoops, how to get everything done, obviously you would have to talk with the exchange, qualified exchange 1031 exchange personnel, and we can obviously be here to go ahead and guide you along the process and connect you. But just want to give an overall idea and kind of the do's and don'ts. So the number one don't is do not think about a 1031 exchange after you have already sold the property.
Right.
Yeah, you have to figure that out before.
Right. So when you're thinking about selling your property and you know you're going to have quite a bit of gain on that property, then that's the time to be reaching out to someone, especially your realtor, to start talking about this, because you do have to identify the next property that you're going to buy within 45 days of selling the property that you're selling. Then you have 180 days total. Or
To close,
yes,
180 days.
180 or 120?
180.
Okay, 180 days to close on that property. So basically, you've got your property, you say, I know I'm gonna have some gains here and I don't wanna pay taxes on them. So I'm gonna go ahead and identify a few additional properties that I can buy once I sell mine. Those you can identify, there's different ways of identifying properties. So one is to identify 3. Another way is to identify maybe 5 or 6, but they can only total complete 200% of the property that you're selling. And then the other option is that you have to, whatever you identify, if you don't buy that property, you have to buy something else that's 95% of the value of that property. So that way, in case you find something and you didn't identify a second property and something ends up turning out wrong with the one that you did identify, which could certainly happen, then you have an option to go out and get a different property. It just has to be pretty much the exact same value. So identifying the properties is a key component of this whole process, and it's absolutely integral. It's required under the code. And the qualified intermediary is going to be along the way to help you step by step, going through making sure you hit those deadlines. Certainly that 45-day one is crucial. It's the one that oftentimes passes. And then of course the other big don't is don't buy something. If you're thinking that you probably should have been using a 1031 exchange because after you bought the next property, there's absolutely nothing that they can do to reverse that.
And in the process of identifying the properties and moving forward, let's say within those 45 days of identifying the property and then putting it under contract, very, very important that if you are working with an agent that they do understand how the contract works, because that contract has to be assignable, right? And that has to be really explained to the seller of that property, that the buyers, I mean, there's very, very, otherwise it won't work.
Right, so a lot of times in our contracts we mark the third box on the Florida bar contract, which says that it's not assignable, and that gives the seller some peace of mind that you're not trying to flip the property, you're not an investor, and a lot of times sellers just don't want someone to come in and get a better deal on their property than maybe what they're getting, or at least that's how it works out in their minds. So we often check that is not assignable clause. However, if you're even just thinking about doing a 1031 exchange and you're putting an offer in, you want to make sure you check the second box, which says that it's assignable, but that you're still basically on the hook to make sure that the liability is still there. So if the deal doesn't go through, you as the buyer are still going to be kind of held liable for that. So that will give the seller some peace of mind. And then of course, agent to agent, you're explaining exactly why you check the assignable clause button in, or you might think of it as a button on the computer, but it's a box that you'll check. And then there's an addendum that has to go along with that too. I think it's like number N, letter N on the bottom of the contract too. And then there will also be an assignment contract that has to go through the qualified intermediary, because part of this process is when the property is sold, the money from the sale of your property as the seller actually will go to the qualified intermediary, and it'll be held there until you purchase the subsequent property that you're exchanging for. So the qualified intermediary does have to be, you have to do the extra paperwork to have them be the assignee of that contract.
Yeah, so it sounds kind of a little bit complicated, right, on this high level. However, it makes a lot of sense, right? This tax code has been in existence since the 1921, I want to say, and it was passed because it stimulates the economy. There have been some changes to it throughout the years, and that's why a qualified intermediary has to have their hands kind of be involved in the process to make sure that everything is done properly. If you have any questions on this, feel free to reach out to us.
Absolutely. We really enjoyed the presentation. Yeah. We think there's a lot of benefits for a lot of people out there, especially those who are seeing quite significant gains in what they're selling, and it's getting our wheels turning for some of our current clients, actually, because we have some elderly clients who have moved out of their properties and they're in nursing homes, and they have this property that's been sitting there, maybe rented out. Well, they're going to be in a great situation now if they want to avoid taxes on the gains that they may have in selling their property, in addition to kind of the residential set off. There's some extra money laying around that they might be able to do something for grandchildren or whatever. So it's exciting to learn about these things, and it's very relevant to what we're doing here in Florida.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's one thing that we kind of debated a little bit about earlier, because it's really interesting, this idea of how long can you continue doing this? How many times can you actually keep on buying properties, let them appreciate, sell them, buy the bigger one, and so forth and so on? How many times can you do that? Well, you can do that for pretty much forever. But for some folks, it ends up being a strategy, a retirement, a wealth transfer strategy, because if the owner of the property who has been deferring these taxes passes away and the property moves to their heirs, the heirs receive that property, and their basis for that property ends up being the fair market value at that point.
Right. So basically, to give you an example of that, if someone, your grandmother, bought her property at $100,000, if she were going to sell it today, it's worth $300,000. So if she did that, she'd have that $200,000 worth of gains and on which she would be taxed. So instead, if she transfers it to you upon her passing, then you'll take that property, and instead of looking at it being purchased for $100,000, the basis will actually change to the fair market value at today's pricing. So that'll be $300,000. So when you go to sell it at $300,000 and the basis is $300,000, there's no gains.
Yeah.
So yeah, it does. It's a very interesting wealth transfer strategy to be thinking about, and there's plenty of other benefits of the 1031 exchange. So we would be more than happy to answer any questions that you guys have and talk to you a little bit about maybe properties that you have that might be ripe for thinking about exchanging.
Yeah, and in a future episode, we are going to talk about how people use their IRA money to buy properties. Very, very interesting.
Yeah.
So, but if you want to know now, you can definitely reach out. We'll let you know.
Absolutely.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
Just like that, 1031